Good morning, everybody. Keith Engle here for TGI Sports Talks one-on-one with Keith Engle. I'll be joined by my guest, Billy Martin Jr. here in just a second. A couple of quick housekeeping items. I want to welcome everybody watching this morning on TGI Sports Talks Facebook feed, our YouTube feed, the Twix. I mixed up the two. X and Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I'm Twitter. I'm too old to change. We're also live on National Streaming Sports Roku channel this morning. Get that channel downloaded. So we welcome everybody. And a quick shout out to Ralph Williams at RW Media. Ralph does some great stuff over there, including the Sports Corner with Smoking Jim Frazier every Tuesday from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. I was a guest there last Tuesday. You can watch that on my Facebook page, and they're making some changes. They'll no longer be on WBVP radio, but there's some other stuff going on, and there's an announcement that Ralph put up that you guys can check out. Ralph does some great stuff across the country. I want to thank last week's guest, Brian Holloway from the former New England Patriot, Pro Bowl lineman, great guy, lived up here in the Northeast for a time. We had a great talk after Slows. Kevin, Brian was a little bit late, but we made the most of it, and we actually went a little long. And next week's guest should be Kevin Mensch, former Texas Ranger and Milwaukee Brewer, and an interesting character from everything I can tell. Today's guest is Billy Martin, Billy Martin Jr., as I said, who's done lots of stuff. He's been a television producer. He's been a baseball manager and an executive. He's a player agent, which I think is still correct now. And we'll get into all of that, including obviously some chatter about his dad, whose birthday was just yesterday. And I know that Billy was out having some fun with some friends last night. Good morning, Billy. How are you?
I'm doing swell. How about yourself?
Excellent. I appreciate you joining me this morning. And now I guess now I know why you said you prefer to do it later today. I wasn't putting two and two together until yesterday when I knew it was your dad's birthday. So I hope you had some fun with friends last night, and I appreciate you getting up early-ish, I guess, to be with us today. One of my favorite managers growing up. I'm a big Yankee fan, and Billy, your dad was one of the best. But before we dive into Billy, your dad, Billy, tell us about what are you up to today? What's up going on in Billy Martin Jr.'s life today?
Okay, well, I've been a certified baseball agent for a long time. Kind of ironic, when my father passed right after I graduated college.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought my dream of being an agent did when he did. And I took my first job in television, started producing sports television shows in the Dallas area. Well, as years went by, I stumbled upon a client, and I'm sure you remember sports writer Phil Pepe.
Oh, absolutely. Sure.
Well, Phil's son, Dave, and I both had clients at the same time and had both been friends since we were 11, 12 years old. And so we were talking to each other. How are you handling this? How are you handling that? And a law firm came to him about starting a baseball version of their agency, and we started running that. So it's been a long, fun ride. I also started a musical booking agency about a year ago. We're called Integrity Booking, and the booking agency had some problems with COVID, obviously. Right?
Yeah, sure.
Lots of shows were shut down, and several agencies, they folded. And so, anyways, we started our first two gigs. One was Leanne Rimes, one was Tracy Lawrence. We sent back money to the people that we did business with, and they said that had never happened to them before in this business. And that's why we went with the name Integrity, because it should be that way.
Yeah, it should be. Well, more things in life should be that way. Unfortunately, they aren't, but
that's right.
Speaks well of you for sure. But Pro Agents is still going. So you're running both of these endeavors together? Cool.
Absolutely.
Cool. And, for a time, too, you got into managing the Texas AirHogs in independent minor league baseball, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just a 1 year, but you were also involved in the front office there for a couple of years until I think COVID shut that down too, didn't it? Eventually, or
Oh, well, in a way. Okay, so Donnie Nelson, former Dallas Mavericks, general manager, president of basketball operations, man, who's should be in the Hall of Fame one day as a general manager, probably. I mean, he's drafted more, signed more players from more different countries than anybody in basketball history, and all he does is pick the right guy. But anyways, he was the main owner of that team, and he's a lot bigger than me and made me manage that year. And
major manage.
oh yeah, he did. And he said it would be good for my career, and he's right. It was something I needed to do. I learned how much I didn't know about the game.
Yeah.
I foolishly thought I could show up at 5:00 and make a lineup and go out and watch the game. And it's obviously a lot more than that. You get very involved with every player's life drama and things that are going on, but I loved it. I really did enjoy that year. And then Donnie cut a deal with China. They were trying to get their baseball team better. So I moved up into the GM slot because Team China already had an established management team. I mean, their manager, John McLaren, had managed in the major leagues. The whole staff was big league. I mean, Garth Orge was the third base coach. He'd been a major league third base coach for over a decade. It was really an impressive group. So I was fine with that. It was really neat to watch the Chinese players who just didn't have the competition our guys did.
Yeah.
And at first it seemed overwhelming for them, and they started getting better and better and better. And it was really neat to watch all that. But then with COVID, half your team couldn't be the China virus. And
right.
So we had to kind of disband the whole deal. And it was sad because those kids had nothing to do with it. And I learned so much from them. We assume the Chinese hate this and don't appreciate that. Well, they hate their government and really have a lot more respect for us than you'd imagine. That's
a problem with a lot of these situations, right? People who are oppressed, right? We think all of the people over there are like the people that are oppressing them, and that's not the case.
Not even close. Hey, I mean, I had some political talks with these guys and was blown away just on how they felt about Americans and everything else. None of them had a choice. They enjoyed playing baseball. They thought it was great, but because they were good at handball when they were super young, the government decided to make them a baseball player.
Yeah. Listen, and guys, your questions and comments for Billy, I'll get to probably as we get towards the end of the interview, just to keep the flow going a little bit. Yeah, I think you being forced into manage in your words kind of answers the next question I had was, did you have a desire to manage based on your dad's history and growing up watching that? Did you have any desire at any point, or were you, because you mentioned wanting to be an agent at the time your dad passed?
Yeah, no, I don't think I did, for lots of reasons, but I know how much, I don't know how my father lived and died.
Yeah.
As a manager, and how much it affected his life and the rest of our lives. You try to leave it at the field. That was one thing I did learn from my father. Especially as he got older, I watched what he did. And as soon as a game was over, usually the whole coaching staff, we'd go to a bar somewhere. But Dad would take his first drink and he would sit down alone. And you could see him then. He'd sit down, he'd have his drink. You could see him just going over the whole game in his head. I should have stuck with my starter another inning. I should have pinch hit in the fifth. I should have done this. I should have done that. You could see it just going through his mind. And that usually took anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. And then he'd look up and, hey, Pard, what's going on? Well, that meant we're done talking about baseball tonight. Okay. Well, the longest that ever took him, I don't know if you remember when Carlton Fisk tagged out Bobby Meacham and Dale Berra.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. That was out number 1 and 2 in the 8th inning in a 1-run game. Okay. And Don Zimmer was the third base coach appointed by George Steinbrenner.
Exactly. I remember.
My father hated George appointing his coaches. He wanted his guys and his loyal guys. And he sat there for 45 minutes that day. And he looked up at me, and I was the only one with him that day. There were no coaches. And he said, you think Zimmer's trying to screw me over?
Yeah.
Or do you think he's just stupid because he has that metal plate in his head? and I said, neither one, Dad. I said, you coach third. Both guys were on him. There's no signal for, send one, stop one. How do you do that? First of all, with your hands. And I'm sure he was hoping that Meacham was going to lay down a body block on Fisk. And, it really was a fluke of a play. It was an amazing play. And, it certainly wasn't Don Zimmer trying to screw my father over. But he never trusted anybody appointed to him like that. And so that was the longest moment I've ever seen him after that.
Well, I know. And again, you're certainly know more than I know from reading about situations that have happened throughout your dad's career. But, he and George had a love-hate relationship, I guess is the best way to term it, right? And George would do things like fire Billy's coaches when he wanted to hurt Billy, and he didn't really want to fire Billy because he knew he'd get the wrath from the fans, although he did it plenty of times. Right?
Well, yes and no. And yes, he did have a love-hate relationship because George had the same loyalty that my father did. If you worked for George Steinbrenner and let's say you got a DWI, he might personally go to the jail himself, pay to have you released, chew your butt out the whole way home and tell you what an idiot you were for making that happen, but you'd still have your job the next day.
Yeah.
He was so unique like that. He was really hard to work for, but had your back forever. My father was on and off manager 5 different times, right? Three was a record. My father had a lifetime contract with the New York Yankees. He was getting paid regardless.
Right.
And so, George liked to pull the puppet strings sometimes. And I'm not sure he wasn't right one time. I think he should have left my father alone every other time, but
which time was he right?
I think maybe the 78.
I thought you might go there. Yeah.
Well, my father was going through a lot. He and my mother were divorcing. It was a tough time for him in a lot of ways, and that team needed some peace. The whole Reggie situation and everything that was going on, there was just so much drama that Bob Lemon stepping in made a more peaceful situation, I think, for the guys and let them just go play, because there was just so much divisiveness and things going on from all different angles and then I think he should have left him alone from then on, because
Yeah.
then it became a really who's in charge situation. And, I don't know. It's easier in retrospect to look back at that stuff.
Were you around the team at that time, Billy, in '78, and your dad at that time? Because I know you'd spend in your youth. We'll spin back to there a little bit as we go. As you're growing up, you were around your dad a lot in the summer times with the team, right? Were you around that year?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it was, and I love that team. It was such a fun team to watch,
Favorites.
Even while my father and Reggie were going through their stuff, Reggie was really good to me. And so, and Dad, I remember Dad looking at me one day in his office and said, Reggie's good to you, isn't he? I said, yes, sir. But, in my mind, I was kind of conflicted. I didn't know should I step back from that? Should I?
Yeah. That's a tough
and he's like, hey, you don't let his and my crap get in the way of any of that. He goes, I think that's great, and I want you to keep it that way. And I'll never forget that, because I know he said the same thing to Ray Negron, who was the bat boy at the time. And Ray was close to George, Dad, and Reggie, right? And think about the stuff he had to get in between. Because how many people could say they were friendly with all three of those parties? And Dad said the same thing to him one day. Don't let my BS with Reggie get in the way with y'all's relationship. And because I don't think the world really realizes my father had a ton of respect for Reggie's ability.
That was my question. I'm sure he respected Reggie.
Oh my gosh. Think how similar they were in the postseason. They were both postseason all-stars. My father wasn't a regular season all-star like Reggie was as a player, but my father was a World Series all-star. I mean, if you want to name your all-time World Series team, Billy Martin was probably your starting second baseman.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a 333 hitter with an almost 600 slugging percentage in the World Series. He and Mickey Mantle hit back-to-back home runs 3 times in World Series play.
He won the MVP, right? And 50, whatever. Did he win the World Series MVP in
53?
53, right.
Yep. 52 had the game-winning catch on Jackie Robinson pop-up.
Crazy pop-up, yeah.
And in that 53 series, he got screwed out of a hit. He never told me this. Mickey told me this story. After my father passed, Mickey would take me out to dinner a couple times a month and tell me stories about my father. He lives here in Dallas. And so he tells me that in the 53 series, Dad hit a ball on the shortstop side of second base that Pee Wee Reese, all-star shortstop, couldn't get to. Jackie Robinson ranged all the way, total layout into left field. The ball touched off the end of his glove. Everybody in the building knew it was a hit. But Mickey thought, the guys all thought the official scorer was a racist and wanted to give an air to Jackie.
Mm.
So it shows how racism hurts everybody, because Jackie gets tagged with an air he shouldn't have gotten. Because even if he gets all the way to that baseball, and nobody else could have probably ranged there in baseball, I don't think there was a faster second baseman than Jackie playing in the league at the time. Second of all, even if he did get the extra 6 inches to catch it, how's he throwing my father out from left field?
Yeah.
And that 12 hits was a record, surpassing Babe Ruth's record my father had right there. Think about my father surpassing a Babe Ruth record. I mean, it's just hard to even wrap my head around. But and he had a man crush on Babe Ruth, so it's really kind of neat. But he really should have 13 hits, because he was tied with 2 other guys for a 500 average. in a 6-game series. And there are still people alive that were in that ballpark. You know, I'm hoping they change that one day, because Jackie does not deserve the air, and my father does deserve the hit.
Well, hopefully they'll do that. Yeah, back in those days, I guess we'll circle back. We'll be around all over the board a little bit, but back to those days, your father was an integral part of those teams, as you talked about, and he had an interesting relationship with Casey Stengel, Casey's boy, right? Was that type of was it a maternal relationship, father and son, kind of, with Billy and Casey?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so Dad played for Casey in 48 for the Oakland Oaks, which was Casey's last minor league team to manage before the Yankees hired him. He wins the World Series in 49 and has them hire the little Dago that played for him in Oakland. They won the championship that year. Dad was the youngest player on the team. He loved that year. I mean, he roomed with Artie Wilson that year. He volunteered to room with the first black player to play for the Oakland Oaks that year. And of course, Artie was a great player, and they won that championship, and they stayed friends for life. But you know, when Casey brought Dad up in 1950, he wasn't bringing him up for his bat or glove even. He was bringing him up because he wanted this in the dugout with him.
Yeah.
He wanted that. Mickey would tell me these stories. He goes, I knew your dad was going to be a great coach a long time ago. We'd be watching a game, and he'd notice something. He'd run over to Casey and say, look where the second baseman is playing. Look where the shortstop is. We can steal second right now. They won't even throw down. And Mickey's like, hell, I just brought my glove and my bat out there and did my thing. And because your dad was always thinking and looking for that angle. Well, he had to. He didn't have the abilities that Mickey Mantle had.
You know, and obviously Mickey, Whitey, and Billy were this triumvirate, right? And they did a lot of partying, had a lot of fun. Let's say they had a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And your dad, and I'm sure he talked about this with you through the years, an incident happened at the Copa Cabana, which is very famous now. And your dad is the guy who gets punished and sent out of town. How much did that hurt him?
Well, first of all, that was 1957.
Yeah.
And it would have been last night, because it was my father's birthday.
Birthday.
The guys asked Dad where he wanted to go on his birthday, and he said the Copa to see his friend, Sammy Davis Jr., who was making his last performance at the Copa. And while they were there, a group of bowlers started throwing racial slurs at Sammy. Well, Dad and Hank Bauer, they walked over to the group of bowlers, said, shut your damn mouth or we're going to shut it. They did. There was a bouncer there that night who wasn't working, who actually was a mobster too, right? And he loved all the Yankee guys. He saw that go down. He's the one who knocked those guys out. Everybody thought Dad and Hank beat him up. When the two main mouths went down to the speakeasy part, that guy knocked them both out. And sadly, Dad basically got blamed for it all. And look, the Yankee GM was looking for a reason to break up the trio of Billy, Mickey, and Whitey.
Yeah.
But, you know, I guess under the lunacy that Mickey and Whitey weren't going to go have a drink anymore if Billy was gone.
That wasn't happening.
I mean, yeah, it's like, so why would you get rid of the good luck charm? You know, my father was the good luck charm. I mean, whoever roomed with him had their best season. Phil Rizzuto roomed with him the year he won MVP. Mickey roomed with him the year he won the Triple Crown. They used to joke in the dugout, who gets a room with Billy this year? because whoever did had their best season. Think about it. My father was a rookie in 1950, World Series championship, 51, World Series championship, 52, World Series championship, where he catches the game-winning fly ball, 53, MVP of the World Series championship. Then he gets drafted to go to the war in Korea. The Yankees don't go in 54.
Right.
Okay. I mean, comes back late in 55. They go. They lose to Brooklyn. He's there all 56. They win it again. He gets traded in 57. I mean, he was a good luck charm. He was clutch. He helped that team. I mean, how many players were like him that could step up that big in the big game?
Very few, very few. You mentioned something, Billy, a couple of times now about race and him rooming with a black teammate and sticking up for Sammy Davis. And there was always, I always felt, because of the issues with Reggie and things you would read, there was these underlying, and nobody came out and said, "Oh, Billy's a racist," but there were all these undertones all the time, right? Which I thought was a lot of crap, because I thought, from watching from afar, I didn't think Billy saw color. I thought Billy didn't like guys who didn't hustle, guys, if they didn't respect the game and respect him, then he'd have a problem. But in no way, shape, or form did you ever did that? I don't know how to. I want to ask.
I know where you're going. No,
Yeah.
My father was the most colorless man I've ever known in my life.
Have people asked you or said, "Geez, why was your dad such a didn't like blacks or whatever"? Have people said that to you?
Only people that heard one of Reggie's interviews, but
okay. Did Reggie believe that your dad was a racist?
I think at one time he did, because Dad felt like he had to be really hard on Reggie to save that team.
Yeah.
Okay. Because my father would tell me in private how much he respected Reggie's ability to play big in big games. Like, he didn't say like I did, but
yeah.
I know that resonated with him. And he told me one time, he's like, because when he was talking to me about Reggie, he goes, "Reggie's really good to you, right?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Good, keep it that way. Don't let our stuff get in the way of that." He goes, "And just to let you know, I really respect his ability as a player, but I have to be hard on him to keep this team together, because Reggie was the highest paid player in baseball. And there were issues on that team. And he said some things, took some shots at Thurman, and
the issues basically in spring training, right?"
Well, yeah. And Thurman was probably the most respected player by his peers I've ever seen in my life. So there was a lot going on, and Dad was just trying to hold it all together. And it's too bad, because I think if they could have figured it out, it would have been amazing. But if Reggie looks back, Dad did get the best out of him. He did push the right buttons psychologically. It was just painful for all of us around to have to deal with. But that's all my father cared about, was winning. He didn't care about the color of your skin, what religion, sexual orientation, any of that stuff. He could care less. He wanted to win baseball games. And that is so apparent in so many ways. I heard a guy using the N-word when we were in Oakland, and my father saw that look on my face, like, "You're not supposed to say that." And Dad walked over and said, "He doesn't mean it that way, son." I said, "All right, Dad, how come I've never heard you say that word in my whole life?" And it was the only time I ever stumped Dad, where he couldn't just like answer me in a split second. He walked around for a second. He goes, "I guess because I was one. Because if you were Italian or Irish and his siblings were all Irish. His stepfather was 100% Irish. He goes, if you were Italian or Irish growing up in the 30s and 40s, you were a Mick or a Dago or a Wop. And he goes, that hurt me.
That was as disrespectful as the N-word to those ethnic groups, right?
Sure. That's right. At that time, there were restaurants that said Irish need not apply, will not serve Italians. Okay? So he lived that and experienced it. And at the end of the day, like he said, he goes, I don't care. I don't care other than winning. I want to win. I'm going to make my lineup based on who's going to help me win. I don't care about any of that other stuff. And that's how he really was.
Well, he did win. I mean, one of the things about your dad was every place he went, they immediately were better.
Yep.
Starting in, I know he started out in the Twins organization in Denver, and they won championships. He gets to Minnesota. They win the AL West, and they lose in the playoffs. But Detroit, Texas, I guess Texas is the only team he didn't take to the playoffs, but that was a remarkable turnaround, however you look at it, because they won about 50 games a year before. Sure.
And if you look at that season alone, I mean, you could almost, if it was today's expanded playoffs, that team would have gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
They finished second to Oakland, who, by the way, is pretty good. They were just winning their third World Series in a row.
That's all.
And so, and had he gotten a little more time in Texas, I'm sure he only had really one full season there, and that saved the franchise. They kept it in Arlington, Texas. People don't even realize that team was for sale. And they fired Hall of Fame manager Whitey Herzog to hire my father, and which I think is another case for why Dad should be in the Hall, because he and Whitey managed the same team. It went from 108 losses to almost 90 wins. And then they managed against each other, Kansas City and New York, 2 years in a row. Which team won?
We were going to get to this anyway, since we're on this Hall of Fame conversation, and Rick talks about, does he belong in the Hall of Fame? I've gone on shows and debated this endlessly. Yes. Herzog's a great manager.
Absolutely. And belongs in the Hall of Fame. And I don't want to take a thing away from the great Whitey Herzog.
Right. Jim Leland belongs in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely.
Irwin belongs in the Hall of Fame. But if those guys belong in the Hall of Fame, your dad has got to be in the Hall of Fame, because to me, he accomplished even more than those guys did. They all won one World Series, and maybe they should have won more, but he turned teams around where they didn't. Those teams, in my mind, all got worse after he left. In one, to different degrees.
His winning percentage is better than 11 managers in the Hall of Fame right now.
Yeah, and I just don't get it. And I gotta believe it's because this takes me back to where I was starting this part of the conversation, was he's winning all these places: Minnesota, Detroit, Texas, but he's only there a year and a half, 2 years, maybe in Detroit. What happened? Why was his personality would clash? I know there's all different circumstances, and there's probably not one. People would like to believe there's one underlying reason, right? And it's his off the field behavior or whatever. But what were the reasons in your mind, and seeing this up close as a kid, that it didn't last longer in these places?
Well, there were times when it felt like Dad was blowing it up on purpose. and literally, I think psychologically he was unintentionally.
Self-sabotaging, you mean? Not sabotaging the team, but himself, you think?
In a weird way, yeah, because he never truly felt like he belonged anywhere. He always wanted to be a Yankee.
Yeah.
But his mother was so hard on him. Jenny was a tough lady, man. Imagine hearing this your whole life. For his father left her when he was 6 months old.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the rest of his life, she would look at him and say, "You look just like the jackass that broke my heart and left me."
Ouch.
He heard that his whole life. I mean, all the way growing up, still heard it as an adult. Okay. And she then married an Irishman who my father loved. But Dad was always kind of the outcast, right? He was the Italian Portuguese, not the Irish kid.
Yeah.
He was always the outsider in his own house, and she would continue to say that to him. So I think that would cause him to blow it up at times. And he didn't care because he knew wherever he went, he would turn a team around. He knew he could win. He doesn't get any credit for being the psychologist he was at pushing guys' buttons differently. You know, I watched him show love to Ricky Henderson one day. Kind of cool. We're in the dugout or the clubhouse, and Gene Monahan, the Yankee trainer, comes in Dad's office, you know, and he's got his book, and he's going through the whole team, and he's like, "Don't start this guy. Pitch this guy only in an emergency." Boom, boom. We're going over the whole roster that's injured. He gets to Ricky Henderson, and he says, "Skip, Ricky wants to play, but his hamstring's pretty bad. We're doing treatment on it right now, and I think you should sit him because we have a day off tomorrow. Then he'll get 2 days rest." So we go straight from Dad's office to the trainer's room. Ricky's laying on his stomach. Dad walks up, puts his hand on his back. "Hey, pal, Gino says you want to play, but he thinks I should sit you." "No way, Skip. I'm your guy. I'm your guy." "You're damn right you're my guy, and I need you all year. Just let me cruise." "Are you sure?" "Promise, Skip. Just let me cruise. Just let me cruise." Meaning, you know, let me run it 80%, not 100%. You know, let me do what I got to do to keep it healthy. And Dad said, "All right, I'm counting on you. I need you all year." But that whole time showing him love like that, I said, "Dad, that was pretty cool." He goes, "What?" I go, "I've never seen you show love like that before." And he said, "Pard, they're all different. Some of them need love. Some of them need a kick in the ass. And some of them I don't need to say a damn word to, but that's my job to figure out how to treat them." And that is, you can't treat them all the same. We're not all the same.
It's funny when you're telling a story. It makes me think of Casey Stengel has a famous quote that, you know, how he managed a ball club, and maybe your dad kind of learned from this too. I don't know. And you probably have heard it. There's 25 guys on your roster, right? 5 of them hate you, 5 of them love you. And your real job is to keep the other 15 guys away from the guys that hate you.
Yeah. Well, one of the things Dad said to me was, "I hate the fence riders, the ones that you can't tell."
Yeah.
He goes, I need to know if they love me or hate me so I can know what buttons to push."
Right.
You know, because I don't care. You know, whatever. They hate me or love me. But the fence riders are the ones I don't like. And he's right, because those are the ones chirping one way or another, and you don't know how to deal with them.
So your dad always had his eye on New York, I'm guessing, as he's going through, you know, all these jobs. He wants to find his way to New York. He either knows or he doesn't know maybe that, you know, after George took over the team, George has had his eye on him for a while. And it all comes together in 75 when your dad got let go in Texas. And as George's won, he tired of the manager that he had in Pilvern. But your dad comes in there, and I'm sure it had to be an exciting time for him. If I'm not mistaken, because we all know about the famous, after he got fired in 78, the famous Old Timers Day, where he was reintroduced. Had to be a great day for your dad. Wasn't it Old Timers Day that he took over in 75 too, if I'm not mistaken? Or am I wrong in that recollection? As I get older, my memory fades.
I don't remember, to be honest with you. I don't remember, but you're right. The one you mentioned, that was his favorite day in baseball history.
It's only 10 days later, wasn't it? Or so ish. 10 days after he got fired, roughly, something like that, 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
I need to do some research on that because that's funny. But the one where they bring him back, he got the longest ovation in Yankee history, and which is kind of funny because Mickey would have gotten it on Mickey Mantle Day when they retired his number, but the announcer stopped the fans. Okay, let Mr. Mantle speak, and so that would have obviously been. But I get to tease the Mantle boys, about that all the time. But
you got that one on them anyway, right?
No, they're like brothers to me. I mean, Mickey was so good to me. I love to tease them about that. But
imagine
it was his favorite day. But I remember asking my father when they were retiring his number in '86. I had a knife made for him that they actually drew 2 images on the handle, and I wanted his favorite moment in baseball history, which I was going to assume was one of those World Series, the catch, his hit in '53, something like that. And he said that was his favorite moment in baseball history because he had his former teammates all with him, along with his players, and it was, and that big ovation and everything. It was because he just, at heart, all he wanted to do was be a Yankee.
Yeah.
And, I wish he'd have got that longer. I wish he'd have got a good solid 7-8 years in a row to just manage that team, because there's no telling what they would have accomplished.
They would have won more than one World Series, that's for sure. I'm sure of that as well.
Me too.
And for you guys who are putting up comments, continue to put up comments. I'll get to them, but before we let Billy go, I promise. And some of them we're touching on anyway. Go back just to say that day in '78 for a second. Imagine trying to keep that a secret today. You couldn't do it. I've never been as shocked watching any sporting event as I was that day. Going, what? Did I just hear that right? Because like I said, I believe it was only 10 days or 2 weeks since he got fired, and here he is coming back. Well, 2 years later, but it was actually going to end up being much quicker, which I guess we could touch on now, because in '79 he comes back. They win the World Series in '78. Let me stay there for a second. You think if your dad stayed, everything going on, do you think because the Yankees had begun to come back before your dad got fired. People forget that. We think about him being 14 and a half behind.
Right.
Bob Lemon comes in, but they'd already started to rebound when your dad resigned at that point, right? I believe he resigned that year. Didn't get fired technically. You think they could have won if your dad had stayed?
Absolutely. I mean, look, for all the drama that was going on, none of those players had any doubts about my father between the lines. You ask any of them, even guys that didn't like him personally.
Yeah.
They'll still say, as an XO manager, he was better than anybody they played for. When it came to reading your opponent, knowing when to hit and run, when to steal, when to call a pitch out. Listen to guys like Tony La Russa, who's in the Hall of Fame. Tony La Russa says, bar none, there was nobody better than Billy. And that's from a guy that was a first ballot lock Hall of Famer.
You talked about the 76, 77, 78 Herzog Royal matchups, which were great series, all of them.
Yes.
But I remember in '77, you talk about, and your dad was always people said, oh, he's an inning ahead of everybody else. And I remember him manipulating. He didn't start Reggie, remember, in Game 5. And he manipulated a matchup that he wanted later in the game. He outmanaged Whitey terribly that day. I think it was Doug Bird. He wanted to get Reggie up against Doug Bird late in the game, and he managed to get that done. And not a lot of guys would have been thinking that far ahead and being able to manipulate things to make that happen. Now, anything could have derailed it, but he still made it happen. And Reggie actually got a couple of hits, I think, to help win that game after that's not starting. It takes a lot of – listen, Your dad was anything. He had courage of his convictions, because it takes a lot of courage to sit sit Reggie in Game 5, a deciding game in any series. So that showed something for your dad for sure.
Yeah, and I wish I knew the whole underlying factor at the time too, because I promise you there was more to it.
Yeah.
Than just that. I mean, the matchups, he still wanted Reggie Jackson up to bat. Sure. He was punishing him for something, and or for the team, the sake of the team. The team was mad at him for something. I wish I read the papers more back then, because I didn't. I was probably in the clubhouse at the time while that was all going on. But
at that age, you might be oblivious to some of the stuff. You're not really focused in on that, right? Well, a lot of that is chronicled both in the book, which was awesome. The book was very, very good. The Bronx is Burning, which I'm sure you've read. I'm sure you've seen I think ESPN did it, right? The adaptation of it. What were your thoughts of, I guess, the ESPN adaptation, and John Turturro plays your dad, and there was some interesting. It was pretty close to the book, I thought, which it
was very accurate in a lot of ways. I mean, I thought the ears they put on Turturro were a little silly.
That was a little comical, yes.
But he even had some of Dad's mannerisms down, and the voice, and I was overly impressed with his acting ability to play my father. Kind of funny. I got to go to the premiere, and then I came home and watched it with my mother. And it was funny watching it with my mom, because the woman who played my mother in the movie was a beautiful lady. And I said that to Mom jokingly, well, good looking gal I've got playing you there. And she goes, well, at least they got that right. But there's a scene right before Game 6 that Dad's about to leave the condo and go to the ballpark. And he says to the character playing me in the other room, Billy Joe, want to go to the game with me? And the lady playing my mother says, shh, leave him alone, Billy. He's watching cartoons. And my mother was furious at that. She's like, now the whole world thinks I don't want my son to go to Game 6 because he's watching Heckle and F and Jekyll. Because that's not true at all. I went to the game with my father.
Yeah.
I'm guessing ESPN just didn't want to pay a child actor to have to go to that deal. But I did go to Game 6 with my father, and that was the first time I've ever drank champagne. And Willie Randolph's little brother and I had a lot of fun.
That relationship, we talked a lot. We have about Reggie and your dad. And I remember after the third home run, the very first guy that met him as he got to the dugout steps was your dad, giving him a big hug. That memory is burned in my memory forever.
Oh, yeah.
So that tells you a lot that, he just wanted to, as you said, he wanted to win. And, he felt he had to get Reggie where he needed him to be to help the team. And the whole Thurman thing too. I mean, I think that gets blown out of proportion. Reggie and Thurman became fairly close after we get past some of that early stuff, don't they?
They definitely became compatible.
Yeah,
and
they're not going out to dinner. I'm friends, but they're teammates.
Yeah, and they all learned a way better way to coexist, to understand everybody. Because look, it's the way every team is. It's just like every office or every business. There are going to be people in there that you don't truck with.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you can't work with them. Doesn't mean you can't win with them. You've got to figure that out. And they did. they finally started to work all that stuff out. You know, Dad and Thurman had a great relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, they could just, when he was really comfortable with somebody, he could just sit with them and not say a word sometimes. And you could see that they were close like that. And
how was Thurman with you? You talked about some other players that were good. How was Thurman with you? Because he's got, he's portrayed this gruff, blah, blah, blah. But I got to believe he was a really good man inside.
Oh my gosh, he was awesome. I mean, now he treated me, he was like a very big brotherish to me. I mean, he would mess with me. Like during batting practice, if I was in the infield, I always had to watch where Thurman was, because he'd catch a ball in the out. If he caught it clean,
yeah,
and I didn't see him do it, he would one hop it and it would hit me right in the back of the knee. And it was amazing how good he was at it. It dropped me to the ground, but it didn't hurt me. And I mean, it sounds like something mean. It wasn't, but it's kind of one of those old baseball adages where, you've got to keep your head on a swivel. You've got to always know what's going on. He wouldn't cheap shot do it to me, only if he caught the ball, because that was my job as an infielder to know it's coming in.
Yeah.
And but he was good to me. And there are pictures of me shagging balls with a catcher's mitt on. Whose catcher's mitt do you think that was?
Terms. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I was wearing his mitt when it all hit me one day how lucky I was to be Billy Martin's son. I'm in Fenway. I'm in left field, shagging balls. I got Thurman's mitt on. A ball hits the green monster and makes that sound only the monster sounds like, right?
Yeah.
And the history of it all hit me. I'm about 15. Wow. Babe Ruth used to run around this outfield, and the DiMaggio brothers, and Ted Williams, and Mickey, and it just, I'm getting goosebumps because I felt goosebumps in that moment. That just, the history all hit me, and the next fly ball that came, my knees were shaking, and I'll never forget that moment. And I was wearing Thurman's glove.
Well, you mentioned me 15, so you had me 15 when, unfortunately, in '79, that awful day in August when we lost Thurman. Were you around the team and with your dad when that happened? And I know
was.
you took it very rough. And tell us a little bit about that period of time.
So, okay, Dad had made them.
Still hard to talk about years later. I'm just a fan, and those days still hit me. That day still hits me. I can
Me
imagine
too.
it'd be that way.
So team was kind of playing bad at the time. So Dad made him have a practice, in season practice on the off day, which he would do if the team was not going good. And I even remember that day, Thurman and Dad were hanging out watching practice. And one of the coaches were hitting me ground balls at second base. And Thurman said to my father, I hope I can see me and my sons one day the way I see you and Billy Joe. Meaning I looked like him. I had his mannerisms. I walked like he did.
Yeah. I
moved like he did. And the next day, Dad and I are fishing in New Jersey, and Dad's giving his buddy a hard time because we're not catching anything. And all of a sudden, we hear a police officer on a megaphone, Billy Martin, come to the dock. Billy Martin to the dock. Dad looked at me. What do I do now, Pard? We get to the dock, emergency phone call. We've got to take you to a payphone. And there were two police cars. So the second one, I walked up to, I said, sir, can I ask you what happened? He said, yeah. He said, your father's about to get a phone call from Diane Munson Thurman died in a plane crash and they didn't want your father to hear it on the radio. And Dad was crushed. I mean, we stayed at his condo that night. He made us steaks. He finally said, I think I got to go out. And I'm like, Dad, you can't go out tonight. Somebody's going to say something to you and it's going to be bad. You can't go out tonight. And I made him a scotch and soda and he didn't even touch it. We watched 2 John Wayne movies. He probably cried 10 different times that night. And I mean, that hurt him so much. It's hard to put into words.
I can imagine it is. I remember that Friday night game, the Bobby Mercer game, so well. And your dad telling, nobody probably wanted to play that game. But to have one of his best friends and Bobby have the kind of game he had, drive in every run, a home run and a double. And it was just so much. You get goosebumps just thinking about it now. And it had to be a tough time. And I know it tore the heart out of that team for a while. And your dad and everybody concerned. So,
well, he was the most respected player by his peers that I could ever remember.
Even Carlton Fisk.
Well, I didn't walk around Carlton's locker room as much, but
they had a healthy competition going on, I guess, if it's the best word for.
Oh yeah, and trust me, like I told you about that moment I had in Fenway, and Fenway's still my favorite ballpark because of the history there. And but when I say this, I drive Yankee fans crazy, but do you know how badly I wanted my father to manage the Red Sox?
Really?
Well, do you think if he'd have taken the Red Sox to the postseason?
Oh, geez.
Can you imagine what would have happened? Do you think once he got back in pinstripes, do you think he'd have ever been fired again?
No.
No way. I mean, there's no way.
What was he at the time that your dad passed? Was he? I mean, the rumors were we're on our way to Billy Six. Was that in fact going to happen?
Well, not if I had my choice. He had 3 job offers.
Yeah.
Go to Japan and become the first millionaire manager.
Interesting.
They were going to pay him $1 million a year. Become the Colorado Rockies' first manager, or go back to the Yankees for stint number 6.
Yeah.
I was pushing for Colorado because Dad had never managed a National League team, and there were sports writers calling him an American League guy. My father would joke about that. He's like, what? They don't think I can do a double switch? It was kind of funny to him.
And Billy could have managed anywhere. I mean, especially, the tactician he was managing National League Baseball and the American League anyway, most of the time.
Absolutely. And also he would have gotten to shape the franchise. Think about the reason Texas hired him and Oakland was because they were selling those teams and they knew he would, quintuple attendance like he did everywhere he went and make them a winner like he did everywhere he went. Well, think what he could have done with that brand new franchise. Buck Showalter, one of Dad's guys. What happened in Arizona? He went and he turned that into they won and were relevant first, right? Well, I think Dad could have done an amazing job in Colorado, and we had a lot of friends there. That was his first job, the Denver Bears, back in '68, and
come full circle. That would have been interesting, right?
Sure. Right. Greg Nettles was on that team, and Art Fowler became his pitching coach for years. Was the pitching coach / closer of that team. Yeah. And yeah, it was a different world back then. The great Charlie Manuel was on that team.
Our Fowler, the guy George always wanted to fire when he was mad at Billy, right? Go fire Art. Right. Listen, I wanted to get to these guys' comments quick. There's only a few there, but before I let you go, I want to talk about the game today a little bit. What would your father think about the way we play baseball today? Because I've said for a while on my shows, what shows that are more commentary driven, that what baseball needs is a Billy Martin. I know it's in one of the comments here probably too, to kind of get things back on track, right? And to address situational baseball, which we don't do today. We just go up and swing as hard as we can. We throw as hard as we can and try to hit home runs or walk or strike out. We don't care about anything else. Runner on second base. I'm convinced if the Yankees were home and they didn't give up a run in the top of the 10th inning, which, by the way, I hate the rule. I'll let you answer that about what your dad would think about some of this in a second. I feel like in the bottom of the 10th, your dad would bunt twice and win the game, and the game's over. Right? But what do you think about that comment, I guess? And what would your dad think about the game in general that we watched today?
Well, there are things that would, but I don't even want to say frustrating, because he would take advantage of it.
Yeah.
You know, people say this to me all the time. Your father would have hated analytics. That's not true at all. My father always wanted additional information. The more information you have, the better you can make your decisions. But knowing the analytics would have allowed him to do even more, because certain teams just do what the analytics say to do.
Right. They lose. They don't have a touch feel of what's going on in front of them on the game, which your dad always had a great pulse on that, for sure.
Absolutely. So he would know exactly when to steal, when not to steal, when to do the things that the other team wouldn't expect. He would have done the exact opposite of what the analytics said to do several times, just to take advantage of it. But that said, people don't even discuss the stuff. Last year's World Series. Well, ironically, the National League team and the American League team were the top defensive teams in both of their leagues.
Yeah, go figure.
What a shocker.
Go figure.
I mean, what I always say to myself is, what would my father have done against the shift? Because I don't think he would have trucked with guys not hitting against the shift. You know, Mickey Mantle would lay down a bunt. If he was going 0 for 8, 0 for 9, he hated going 0 for 10. He would lay down a drag bunt just to get on base and break the bad mojo. Imagine how crazy that would drive an analytics guy. The guy with maybe the most natural power in baseball history is laying down a bunt.
Right.
But he did what he felt like he needed to do to win the game. Sometimes that's to get on base. Like you said earlier, guys just go up and swing. They don't have a job.
Situation doesn't matter. They approach every bat the same way.
And it does matter. Sometimes your job's to get on base. Sometimes it's to move a guy over. Sometimes it's to knock in a run. You know, sometimes it's to take a lot of pitches. Let's get this guy out of here.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's that's what I miss. I miss the agenda of every at bat. And I just don't understand how a guy doesn't just barrel one up the other way and smoke one. Doesn't mean you have to hit it soft over there.
Oh.
But take advantage of those holes.
That rule about eliminating the shift, I said, you don't need rules to eliminate it. You just teach guys to approach the game differently. That's how you should do it, not artificially fix it. Actually teach guys how to play the game the right way.
Mm-hmm. And that's got to be done at the youth level.
Yeah.
All the way up. And today's kids don't learn all those things. I mean, you go watch a kid's game now. You'll see a kid hit a double. And instead of looking to see that the center fielder throws it to the cutoff man and that play's made, instead of waiting to see if this guy can turn and take third base, he's already looking back at the dugout going, doing some little sign to his buddies. They're not looking for that extra base. They're not looking to be that old school fiery player that's always trying to grab what you can.
Agreed. So what do you think? In the right circumstance, again, you're not going to do it if you got your 3, 4, 5 guys coming up. But in that circumstance, at the bottom of the 10th, still tied with a man on second base and nobody out, I can see your dad butting twice and squeezing that run in from third base and just going home.
Absolutely.
Nobody wants the guy to third base.
Or butting the first guy over, right?
Yeah.
And then squaring like you're about to
and punch the ball, right? Yeah.
And slashing. It depends on your personnel every time, but no doubt about it. Because we're talking about the guy that was the manager of the team that set the record for stealing home the most.
Rod Carew had the individual record, right?
There you go. That's Rod Carew, who my father was the godfather of his daughter, Stephanie, and spoke to her last week. And another guy, think about Rod Carew had a reputation for being a selfish player and, not a good teammate until Dad coached him. And then his reputation was just as an about to be Hall of Famer because
great player.
Oh, and he was a great teammate once people understood him and Dad helped him to how to kind of to be himself and to talk to his teammates and let them know what he was thinking. And, Rod gives my father a ton of credit for helping him become the player he did.
Well, he became a great player, as did a lot of guys under your dad's tutelage. So let me get to a couple of these comments and see if there's things we haven't touched on real quick before we let you go. I know I've taken you up a lot of your time, and I do appreciate it. So Kenny says he's not a Yankee fan, but he thinks your dad was the best manager in many aspects in baseball, which we've talked about here today, and I think we'll all give him great accolades. Rick has a great question here. When you were managing that year, did you have your father's fire and temper at times, I guess, when managing?
Don't ask stupid questions.
Well, there you go. There's your answer, Rick.
I got kicked out of a few games. I don't know. I certainly didn't know the rule book like my father did, but it was such a learning experience for me. I learned how much I didn't know about the game. I lost my pitching coach early in the season, so I had to handle the arms too. And wow, it was a lot, but I loved it. I loved every second of it, and it was a great moment. But did I have Dad's fire? I'd say 84% of it. Yes,
still pretty high. It's still pretty high. Steven, all our Perth guys are out today. He's got a baseball signed by your dad and Mickey Mantle. Hang on to that. That thing's probably worth some money, Steve.
I've got a funny one, Steven. I've got a Mickey Mantle bat, and it's one of his real bats, signed by my father. And I don't know the story on it. Mickey's sons, the two left, David and Danny, neither one. No, we don't know the story on it at all. But it's definitely one of Mickey's bats that Dad signed. So, but did somebody bring it to him at a show, or who knows? Interesting.
Dave has a I'm sure this is a mistyping here. I don't think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. I think he means the Baseball Hall of Fame, which we've talked about. And there's no way, as we've just talked about, your dad does not deserve. And hopefully, whatever we're calling we changed the name of this Veterans Committee or whatever we're calling it today. every other year, it seems. Hopefully they'll wake up and your dad will get that enshrinement here eventually.
I hope so. I hope so.
You should.
But I try not to comment on too much because I know the hall doesn't like a lot of drama. And they're trying to do it right. I mean, it's not easy what they do. I think it's hard for them because of all the on and offs with George,
Yeah.
But think about it. George deserves to be in the hall. And will they let him in? Because George obviously made a lot of people angry over the years, but the man won. And, the world doesn't realize everybody thought George meddled too much in baseball. If you knew George's history, he was a high school and college football coach. He coached at Purdue and Northwestern University.
Yeah.
He had to leave his dream of being a football coach to take over the family business because his father got sick. And he had to take over the American Shipping Company, and he took it to complete new heights. Well, when he did, there was all this extra money. He was trying to buy an NFL franchise. This was in 1970, and nobody was selling because the NFL was blowing up. George meddled too much in baseball, according to people. The sport he said he didn't know much about. Think what he'd have done in football if he'd have been able to stumble across he had a little shot at the Cleveland Browns for a second. If he'd have gotten that team, he'd have made Jerry Jones look like a fan. I mean,
Right.
it had been amazing what George did, but he stumbled upon the Yankees, who were for sale for $8.8 million. And
I heard a rumor that George put up like $10,000 of his own money in that purchase.
$155,000
Okay, that's still
to become majority owner of one of the top 3 most amazing franchises and valuable franchises in the world.
That's a pretty good return on your investment. Jeez. There's a great episode of Letterman when George is on, and I don't know if the thing was set up. I don't think it was, where Letterman coaxed him into calling your father in the clubhouse while they were filming the show. And it's a great, because he goes through the switchboard, "Get me Billy, it's George." And he picks up the phone, he goes, "Hello," and he says, "It's George." He goes, George who? George Steinbrenner. And he goes, "Again?" It's a great scene. I don't know if it was set up or not, but
I'm sure it was. Yeah.
Funny scene. Chris talks about you when you're growing up with your family and friends from Minnesota, where your dad played his final season. I don't even know if you were born when he played his final season, but were there kids that you grew up with, through the Denver, Minnesota years?
Absolutely.
Coaching? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that was with my mother. We went to every home game, and so of course I was supposed to sit in the stands and be a good little boy, but I always tried to go sneak off and play stickball or something with whatever kids I could, and I have tons of memories from lots of kids all over the country that were my buddies. My favorite kid of all time was Robbie Alomar. I mean, we had so much fun. Our parents had to drag us away wherever we were playing. But no, I loved going to the field with my father. That was, it was a gift.
Well, that'd be pretty cool, as you mentioned before. Rick, we touched on this, obviously, with your dad getting the Hall of Fame. We touched on that. We touched on this, too, a little bit, that Billy would be great today with the computers flying all around and him, I think, staying where it is. Sometimes Kenny's typing screws me up, but I think he's talking about the analytics, right? And you made a great point that he would make use of them, both the good part of them and exploit the bad part of the analytics. So
absolutely.
The problem with the managers today is so many guys, they got this script in front of them, And sadly, I think Aaron Boone is one of those guys. I hate to say, but when it comes to pitchers, your dad was a great handler of pitching staffs, I thought, especially with the Yankees. And now a guy's got his job. Well, it doesn't matter whether I just got out of the inning, the seventh inning, and 3 pitches, or I threw 100. I got to get my 8th inning guy in. I don't think your dad was that kind of guy. He's gonna pay attention to what's happening in front of him, and not just look at the numbers. That's my 8th inning guy. He's got to pitch.
You're so right. That is something. That's something I want to ask Brian Cashman, who's an old friend of mine. We literally were interns for the Yankees together in the mid '80s, and I don't know if Yankee fans know that Brian Cashman even acted as a clubby for a little while, and there's nobody that loves pinstripes more than Brian. I mean, he's a special guy, but going back to watching what's happening now, like I remember a Yankee game, they were playing Houston and Paxton was pitching. So I don't know if this was whatever year it was. I was watching the game with a bunch of scouts who were all cheering for the Yankees because Houston had just fired all of their scouts, basically. And so the whole group is cheering for the Yankees to win this game. And Paxton gave up a run in each of the first 2 innings, but inning number 3 figured it out. And we're all like, whoa, he's got it going now. And 2 outs into the inning, out comes Booney, and they're pulling him. And we're all screaming at the TV, dude, he just figured it out.
Yeah.
And they brought in Shreve, and he was great, and he shoved for the next few innings. But that game went extras, burn out the whole bullpen, and I think cost the Yankees the series. And my question is going to be, who's watching the now? Who's paying attention to that moment? Because I get that Shreve matched up great with the next 6 hitters. But who is watching the now? Because to me, that's everything. And I was saying this to a friend earlier when we talked about my father maybe taking over Colorado. If I could design a ballpark, I want somebody sitting right behind home plate watching every pitch. One of the things I noticed the most about being in the dugout as a manager, I'm used to sitting with scouts behind home plate when I go to a game, where I could see every pitch, where it is, where the catcher's asking for it, where it ends up. I could see when guys are locked on.
Right.
You can't see, anything but up and down when you're in the dugout. And it's a completely different look. I want somebody right behind home plate telling me, oh, okay, he's hitting the spots now. I think that's important. Now, you touched on something that's really drives me crazy, but
no feel. These guys they don't have a feel. They're just, going what the script tells them to do. And I hate that. Dave Guyette met your dad in Johnstown, New York, which is not far from where I am here, for a fundraiser in 1977. He got to shake his hand and talk to him for a few minutes. So, and I know Dave's a big Yankee fan, so that had to be a big moment for him.
I'm going to guess, David, that Dad was very friendly with you. It's funny because people tell me they met Dad all the time, right? And I was at a bar with him somewhere, and I'll say, what was he like? And if they spent time talking to him, they all say the same thing. Oh, my gosh, he was one of the nicest men I've ever met. But the ones who don't talk to him, he was feisty. He was feisty. He was a completely different person on and off the field. Yeah. And you have to be in this game or you go crazy. If you carry it home with you every time, you're going to the loony farm.
It's funny, your dad, and again, there's always the comments about what happened off the field in a few isolated incidents, right? But I got to believe through the course of his career, if he didn't have some restraint, those things could have happened every night. So, I think the handful of things that happened could have happened to any of us and probably get blown out of proportion a little bit. JB from the Back It Up Binge Pop podcast, he's a huge Orioles fan, I know. He said, Billy, your dad is one of his all-time favorite managers, loved his fiery approach, and he got Brett good. Brett had a problem with your dad, didn't he, because of his brother or something? If I remember right, Ken Brett got traded to the Yankees, and I think in the Willie Randolph deal. And your dad didn't pitch him, promised him something. This is what George's story is. But maybe he was using that to fuel his own fire. Who knows when it got to playoff time. I don't know if you know anything about that.
I vaguely remember that. I know Dad liked George, and they got along pretty good off the field. You know, the whole pine tar incident.
Oh, geez, that's the one we forgot to get to. That was
that was such a neat thing, because what most people don't know is that they had that in their back pocket for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, those guys were watching every team. They had a list of every player who was breaking that rule, and Dad just waited until a moment when it really hurt. You know, and it happened to be George, and it happened to be during that playoff run. And it's such a fun moment to watch, because when you ever see anybody as angry as George Brett was in that moment, as he should have been? It's a silly rule, you know.
Right.
But the rule's the rule. The commissioner should have stuck by it.
I agree.
I think the way they should have done it was they should have let Brett have the home run on his record book, but not have it count the game.
Yeah.
I mean, because did it affect him hitting that home run? No, not one bit. It had nothing to do with it. It didn't give him an advantage or anything. It was a stupid rule. Change the rule, but it was the rule at the time, so it shouldn't have been able to change the impact of the game. So that would have been my rule. But
it's pretty funny. I saw an interview with George Brett, I don't know, probably from a few years ago. And he said, the first time I watched that, he said, I couldn't believe that was me. He says, I thought I went out there calm and cool. How he could have thought that, I have no idea. Because as you said, I don't think I've ever seen a guy that angry. And I was afraid something bad was going to happen for George's sake. But that was certainly one of the funnier, interesting. Did Billy have a manager? I'm going to guess. I think I know who it is. Earl.
Yeah.
Is that right?
And he did. He loved Earl and battling Earl, and you know, and he liked getting to know the guys too, because I think he felt like that helped him. I mean, he and Tony La Russa would actually go out after games against each other and have drinks and stuff. And, you know, they had a neat competition friendship all at the same time. But I'd have to put Earl up there as one of his top all time, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Friendly nemesis. Yeah.
This is interesting. This is kind of what led up to the whole your dad resigning in '78 was the whole partly, I shouldn't say. This was probably the finishing touches of it when he had Reggie bunt, then he took the bunt off and Reggie tried to bunt anyway, and Reggie took off his glasses, and we're waiting for a replay of '77 in Boston. But I don't know. I mean, I think I don't really know. This is probably just another bit of gamesmanship and Billy tweaking Reggie maybe to get his attention, and Reggie just taking offense. And
of course, you know, and sadly, nobody breaking any of it down, right? Dad may have wanted Reggie to show bunt.
Yeah.
Right? To bring in the infield, right? And then takes it off. I did that quite a lot because it changes the way they position themselves.
Sure.
And I don't know this. I'm just throwing that out there theoretically. But he took it off and Reggie didn't. And Reggie did that obviously to harm my father. And You know, there was so much of that stuff going on that it's sad, because I think if both of them would have stepped back and found a way to make it all work, there's just no telling what that team could have accomplished.
Gosh, they might have made, they would have been the A's of the later 70s, early 80s, I think.
Absolutely.
All been able to kind of get on the same page all the time. And to wrap it up here real quick, Chris has got a couple of questions outside of baseball. We talked about what you're up to with the agents and whatnot already, doing the agent for ball players, and moved into the music industry. So we wish you luck there. He wants to know what you're eating.
Well, I'm a Texan, so I do eat lots of meat, and I eat pretty healthy. I work out. I'm in the gym just about every day.
Well, you look great, so I can see that.
Thanks. I'm getting older, and that's why I have to wear a hat now, because I'm having a bad hair day most of the time.
Well, by my head, I can relate. So
as far as music, I love Texas country music. It's kind of a new movement. It's a mixture of kind of old outlaw country with blues and classic rock, kind of all fused together. And it's a little different than Nashville country, which I like too. But this Texas country, it's where Chris Stapleton came from.
Love Chris Stapleton. Yeah.
And it's pretty neat music. And I'm lucky I can go out, and there was a free show last night I didn't go to, but I should have. And the week before, I saw a band called Uncle Lucius. Listen to this band. They sound like an old, almost rhythm and blues soul music fusion with a little Texas in there. And they're outstanding. And it's some neat music.
That's cool. What do you read? Are you a reader? What do you read when you read? What's Billy Martin read?
Box scores.
There you go.
Basically,
I read baseball books and box scores. It's funny. Well, I think that I got a couple of great interviews. Rick says, thanks for coming on. I do appreciate it as well. JB says the same thing. Billy, this has been I went longer than I normally go, and I appreciate your patience in taking this extra time with me, because I've had a really great time chatting with you, and I hope you've had fun, and wish you luck in your endeavors going forward, and really appreciate your dad. And I'll be talking him up for the Hall of Fame the little bit that I can do from my little corner of the world.
Well, that's appreciated. There's somebody started a Billy Martin fan page on Facebook, and it's great. If any of y'all are on Facebook, get on there, throw your 2 cents in there. It's appreciated. Hopefully it'll happen one day. Hopefully in my lifetime. I'd love to see it. My kids never got to meet him, but luckily for them, they get to see so much of him on TV, because he wasn't like, what I joke with is, well, it's called the Hall of Fame. Name a more famous manager in baseball history. My father hosted Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
Okay. He was mentioned in and played in several different movies, television shows. Obviously,
commercials, iconic commercials.
Absolutely. I still smoke Captain Black pipe tobacco because my father represented it.
The Miller Lite commercials are classics.
Oh, they're my favorite. It looks like they're starting to kind of redo some of those. And with AI, I want to talk to him, because I've talked to the Mantle boys about it, and because he did some with Dad, and Dad would have paid them to do those commercials. He had so much fun doing those commercials. Made friends for life. He and Jim Shoulders stayed friends for life. John Madden, he moved 2 houses down from John when he took the Oakland job and bought a house there.
Cool.
That was so much fun for him. But tell me a manager that was been on the cover of Sports Illustrated 7 times, had done the things he did. He was absolutely the most famous manager ever. So isn't it called the Hall of Fame?
It is. Well, it's all very good today, I guess, but that's another discussion we can get into another time.
Oh, I can't go there. I can be careful there.
Billy, thanks for coming on. You enjoy your weekend, and I appreciate it more than you know.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much. The great Billy Martin. Guys, I'm going to wrap it up here. We're going to be off Sunday. We won't have a stream of consciousness because I'm going to be going to Lake Placid, and I will be back on next Friday with my guest, Kevin Minch. I left poor Billy in the room there. Sorry about that, Billy. So I'll be back with Kevin Minch next Friday, as we'll be off Sunday and I'll put a post up so you guys know. I'll be off Sunday with which we're traveling to Lake Placid, and I'll be off Wednesday because of some work obligations. But guys, been great. You guys have been wonderful as always. Hope you enjoyed. I enjoyed this conversation as much as any I've had, and we'll be back next week with the great Kevin Minch. Call him today. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.